All right. Hi, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on embracing career confidence in an unstable job market. My name is Shannon Tim, and I'm the Director of Alumni Relations at the Wisconsin School of Business. I'll be helping to moderate our Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. So as the presentation is going on, please feel free to submit any questions that you have into the chat box, and we will queue those up at the end of the presentation. In terms of what else is going on at UW-Madison right now, we have been getting questions from our alumni community just about what's happening on campus. So I wanted to spend just a little time giving a quick update. There's a lot on this slide, so I'm not going to go over it all in detail. But in terms of what this looks like for students, all courses for the spring semester are transitioned to alternate delivery. That has also been applied to summer term courses as well. So unfortunately, that does mean that in-person commencement ceremonies have been canceled. But the good news is that all students are still going to be graduating on time. And this is not going to affect anyone getting their degree, and those will still be conferred, as well as some virtual opportunities to celebrate graduation as well. We've also been getting questions from our alumni community about how you can help. First, I just want to say I think that this is a true testament to our alumni network. That people are willing to dig in and help each other out in times of need. But in terms of how you can help us right now, there are two ways. The first is related to graduation. So as you can imagine, our students are disappointed that they're not going to have the graduation that they thought they were going to have. They're not going to have the graduation that we probably had and remember pretty fondly. So we are asking all alumni to rally behind the class of 2020 and submit a video message congratulating them on their accomplishment, give them some advice, just kind of make them feel good in this moment. We're going to put into the chat box right now a link to that if you are interested in recording a video. It's very simple. You can just do it right on your phone, record a 30 second clip, just kind of shouting them out and celebrating them. Wear your badger red. It's very easy. The second way that you can help right now is by sharing your story with us. So we are very eager to share alumni stories about how you or your business might be pivoting to come out of the pandemic. Maybe you have just general advice about how you're coping right now, or something that you'd like to share with other badgers. If this applies to you, please email us with your story. Our email address is alumni@wsb.wisc.edu. Natalie has also put that in the chat box right now. So please get in touch with us if there's something that we should know about. We want to share your story with others. And then in terms of what else is coming up, again, there's a lot on this slide, so I'm not going to go through it all in detail, but there is one thing that I want to highlight. It's a new opportunity, virtual networking chats that we are rolling out. What these are small group conversations with like-minded badgers. So the goal here is really to connect you with others who might be in a similar situation as you are right now. We're also going to include some content experts as part of these chats. So it's going to be limited to 10 or 15 people per group. And we're going to start with 4 different groups. So Wisconsin small business leaders, entrepreneurs, managers of virtual teams, and job seekers. If these go well, we'll do more of them and we'll do different groups as well. So if you're interested, we just actually made these live today on our website. And so we're going to include a link in the chat box as well to that information if you are interested in participating in some of those. Otherwise, we do have more webinars coming up. Stay tuned because we have some other things in the work probably ahead of June that we're working on right now as well. So on that note, let's get to today's topic. I am so happy that we have Gina Jenkins with us today to go in depth on career advice. Gina is the Director of Career Management for the Wisconsin Full-Time MBA and Master's program. She also serves as a career coach to students throughout the job search process, and I'm really proud to call her my colleague. So welcome, Gina. Thanks so much for being here. We really appreciate it. I'm going to turn it over to you now to get us started.
Thanks so much, Shannon. Give me 1 second. I'm going to start sharing the presentation. Okay, I'm going to turn on my video for my intro here, and then I'm going to turn it over to the slides for the rest of it. So before I kick off, a little bit about myself. I'm in the 7th year with the Wisconsin School of Business. I serve a variety of students throughout the years and employers, but mainly our full-time MBA and master's programs. I started my career in HR for a couple years before landing at UW, where I've been in career services for just about 13 years, serving alumni at UW-Madison prior to coming to the Wisconsin School of Business. My coaching style is strengths-based and solution-focused, which you will probably see illustrated throughout the webinar. Basically, lean into what you're good at, build a strategy, and move forward. I do really welcome connections. And so let me throw up my LinkedIn URL right there. I welcome connections and continued conversations after the presentation. So please connect with me on LinkedIn. And I will also share my email address at the end of the webinar. As Shannon mentioned, we are collecting questions throughout the content. She will be collecting those questions via the chat box and then moderating those at the end of the session. I'm hoping to allow like 10 to 15 minutes of questions. If we don't get to your questions at the end, we are still collecting those. And my goal is to get everyone an answer to all of the questions submitted. So feel free, submit away as many questions as you possibly have. So I'm going to start by laying a little bit of a foundation to what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to throw myself off video so we can concentrate on the slides there. Most importantly, all of you are tuning in because your job has either been directly affected by the crisis in terms of layoffs, cancellations of promotions, offers frozen or rescinded, etc., or you're anticipating a potential change and want to be as prepared as possible. This environment is incredibly unstable, and there's new news and decisions happening every single day that shifts the market back and forth. So the question I am trying to answer is, how do people approach a job market like that confidently enough to find success? For those of us who are working during the 2008 to 2009 or 10 downturn, there are glimmers of similarities, along with very large chunks of the unknown. Basically, everyone is just trying to do the best that they possibly can to help each other through this experience that no one really has gone through before. But now that we've kind of gone through a couple months of this job market, there are some knowns, and I threw them on the screen there. So we all know the market went from hot to freezing in a matter of weeks. It happened extremely fast. The leisure and hospitality sector got hit the quickest and hardest. The drop of employment over these past couple months wipes out every one of the gains in employment in these sectors over the past 2 years. We can probably all recognize even in February that those sectors were booming, and they have really grown over the last couple of years. Healthcare, professional business services, retail, construction have also been affected at various degrees. But across all industries, many companies, all industries, all sectors, a lot of them are experiencing hiring freezes, they're on hold, they're enacting furloughs and or layoffs. So this goes on and on, right? So we all know all this. And the way the job market reacts is it waves back and forth, and businesses open and close, budgets get cut, hiring changes. It's pretty much out of our control, right? So the question that becomes relevant, that puts the control back into the hands of the job seeker, is this. In a tough job market, how can you find success? How can you take control to find success for your career? I'm going to walk through 4 areas to consider when approaching a job search in this job market. I want to call them steps, but they don't really have to be chronological. We'll talk through how to strategize, prepare, organize, and activate. The name of this webinar is Embracing Career Confidence. So what does confidence have to do with any of this? It is my observation and work with people over the years that confidence is a requirement to career success. Without it, I've seen people not go after the jobs they want, cut their answers short in interviews, be scared to reach out to strangers in their network, and ultimately hold themselves back. I've personally seen confidence grow by implementing these steps. Think of these as a way to affirm, build, and validate your confidence. We'll touch more on that as we go through the content. First up, strategize. Everything is dependent on timeline, which is why it is listed first. And it's very personal, it's very individual. When do you need to secure something? What is your needed pay? When do you need that by? Especially in this environment when unexpected job changes come rapidly, this becomes even more important. And it's different for everybody. Keep timeline in mind as we go, since timeline should determine overall strategy and not the other way around. In other words, there are only a certain number of hours in the day. How do you want to fill them up? The second piece of this is setting specific goals. Are you utilizing this to seek out something different? Are you feeling you need to take whatever is available? A visual I like to use while I'm coaching is a simple diagram that allows you to consider your interests, skills, and the job market when targeting in on your specific goals. Ideally, you'd aim right for the middle, a perfect combination of all three that secures you an available position in a role that you are skilled and passionate about. And a number of people will be able to continue this type of targeting. It can also be helpful to understand what it means to only hit one or two of these areas. For example, let's say you target jobs in which you are very skilled and are available in this job market, but it doesn't hit at your true interests or passions, or perhaps not what you wanted to secure as your next position. How does that change your strategy? Maybe going after that position is a smart move based on your timeline. You need a job quick, so you're willing to sacrifice your interests. It might also mean a shorter horizon in that next role, so in a couple of years, you can edge the target back to the middle. In this scenario, I would advise to make sure the job still builds on your experience and continues to add to your unique strengths regardless of passion. What can make you marketable in your next job search when that pops up in a couple of years? So next up, let's say you find a job that hits again at your skill areas and you are super passionate about. I call these quote unquote dream jobs. Dream jobs don't become a reality unless they are sought after in the job market. And again, in this environment, I would advise to focus on those targets that at least touch a little bit on the market. They don't have to be in hot demand. We hear of that all the time, right? In some articles, what's the hot job right now? And it doesn't need to be a hot demand job, but when budgets are tight, the job market becomes more of the lead in your search. Last up, when you find something that's available in the market and you're super passionate about, I would say this is primarily what I start working with in a coaching setting. People want to change careers, but they've never had that specific role before. They are seeking a position that potentially could be 2 levels too high for their experience, or they think they have the skills needed to excel, and they might just have misinterpreted the job posting. On the other hand, using this as a guide can be really helpful to determine your skill gaps. Again, this is all about timing and timeline, which is, again, very individual to the job seeker. Do you have time to do an online certificate or course to skill up to the job you want? Do you have time to volunteer to take on part-time project work to build up skills? Or perhaps you're financially stable enough to look ahead and enroll in an MBA program for a couple of years. Hint, hint. But in any case, this is the hardest target to manage and typically takes the longest. Again, it's all about your personal timeline. I'll say finally about the diagram that I know this is general. And in one-on-one coaching sessions, this is where a coach would break down your personal diagram and help you target in on your specific strategy. And your targets could include areas all of the above. But once you have an understanding of what you're looking for, how do you prepare? In this kind of market, preparation becomes really essential. The more prepared you are, the more comfortable and confident you will be when asked for a conversation or interview. You can see the basics listed there. Again, nothing revolutionary. Eat less and exercise, right? There's not a magic formula here. but the key becomes to actually do it and hold yourself accountable. For your resume, when I worked with those who have been laid off in the last month or so, a very common theme is I haven't searched for a job in forever. I haven't looked at my resume. What is interviewing even like these days? So for the resume, first I'd say is short and sweet. 1 page all day. This is very hotly debated. This is my personal opinion. And I know there are people on the call, I guarantee there's people on the call that who think there's no way that they can fit their experience into just 1 page. But that aside, debate aside, thinking of your resume as a flyer, how big or how many pages of a flyer would you like to read? Now, we need to qualify this by saying that I reviewed and wrote plenty of 2-page resumes, so they can definitely work. I would just encourage everyone to focus on the real estate of your resume, on what is really going to get you the interview for the job you want. Experience from 10 plus years ago, with exceptions, of course, probably won't help you right now. I'll also lead into the other elements by saying a resume should not be the only thing a recruiter sees about you. Hopefully you've done some networking by then, so you can couple that with your resume, possibly scan your LinkedIn profile and have a few emails back and forth. They're already a couple steps ahead in knowing you. If it's a formal application, that most likely you've been advised to include a cover letter, even if it's not required. All of these lead into how you are telling your story. Your written materials, along with your verbal story and interviews, informal conversation, are another layer of preparation, and it's the area that most people don't prioritize. If I asked you the question, why are you looking for a new job? Could you answer? Would you feel confident answering? If not, write it up and practice. Of course, that's just one question to practice on a multiple to be really prepared for the job search process. All in all, you should be able to represent in all your materials a few components. First up is unique skills. So these are the assets you are bringing to the table that are of value to the company. Unique to you and unique to the job requirements. And your accomplishments. If your resume isn't shouting about how you've used your unique skills to be successful and how successful you've been, I'd dig in more to add that content. It's not enough that you did things, you need to prove that you are accomplished at them. It's important to make sure that they understand your overall responsibilities. And by this, I don't mean tasks that you were assigned. I mean your accountabilities. What projects did you lead? Who did you manage? What work did you oversee and move ahead? What change were you directly responsible for making, and what impact did you have? Lastly, the core of who you are should shine through your materials. What are you passionate about? Who do you want to help and serve? Why do you want to contribute to the company's mission? Why is it important to you? All of these elements make up your story. And I'll repeat, the most successful job seekers are able to tell that story in every touch point of the process. The more you reflect on that, prepare, and practice, the more confident you will be when presenting yourself for a job. So by now you have set your timeline, determined your goals, and prepared your story. Next, it's time to get organized. Think about getting all dressed up and know where to go. Pretty much all of our lives today, come to think of it. Anyways, putting in all the strategy and preparation doesn't make any sense if you don't put yourself out there. And the best way to start getting out there is to organize everything. So think about your network. Who is in your closest and next closest circle, and how are you going to outreach to them? How are you going to get your story out there? So you need an outreach plan, which you could easily start or get warmed up by reaching out to your closest network. I would also consider a tracking process. I have really seen this make a difference for a lot of people. I've seen the difference between someone not having a tracker, not having all of their contacts organized someplace beyond LinkedIn, and the people who have an Excel doc with all of their networking contacts, contact information, when to follow up, when they did follow up, the results of each application, etc. It's especially, in my opinion, important for job applications. If you're in an active job search and you're planning on sending out more than 1 or 2 job applications, it's really important and kind of hard to remember what you've applied to over that amount. Once you get over that amount, it's hard to remember which ones are in process, which ones you still need to submit, which ones you did apply to, when did you apply to, did you get a confirmation email, etc. I've seen some students and clients keeping track basically by their email inbox. And think about if you've applied for over, let's say, 10 positions over the last couple of weeks, how you might have to sort through your inbox in order to see when you applied to certain jobs. It's not ideal. I also will say about follow-ups, how important those tend to be, especially in the time where a lot of recruiters are really busy right now if they are still hiring. And it's almost doing them a favor to follow up to just check the status of your application. I have experienced students and clients following up with a job application and getting an interview just because they followed up. So it's really important to send a follow-up email, find someone to talk to, connect with, and make sure that you're still progressing in the process. Some FAQs that I pulled out for the organized bucket. And again, please feel free to keep submitting your questions through the chat. Shannon is collecting those and we can answer more at the end. But here are some very common questions I get with this section. One is, do I need multiple versions of my resume? So I would think about it in the way of developing a version of your resume for each of the bucket of jobs that you're applying for. So for example, one version could be for if you're looking for IT project management positions. Another version of your resume could be for just general project management positions or product development positions. So the same person could be going after each of those bucket of positions, but you wouldn't necessarily need to revise your resume for every single job within each of those buckets. So for cover letters, I get this question all the time. Do I really need a cover letter? I will say this, if it's optional on the application, I usually advise yes, include a cover letter. There are some recruiters now and some recruiting processes that explicitly say do not include a cover letter. They just want resume. Or I've also seen some applications ask for just like an overview snapshot of why you want the position, what makes you qualified, and your accomplishments. So maybe more in paragraph form than cover letter. So if they give explicit instructions or alternates then of cover letters, obviously follow their directions. But if it's just an optional submit a resume and or a cover letter, I will always say yes, submit a cover letter, but make sure it's a good cover letter. Should I still apply online for jobs? I have seen various advice given out in the world for this question, especially in the last month or so. In my opinion, yes, still apply online for jobs. There are still jobs being posted daily. There are a lot of companies still hiring, and I think it's a missed opportunity for you not to take on the traditional process of online job hunting. That being said, applying for jobs should always be an add-on to the other networking and informational interviewing you are also doing for your job search. But overall, yes, still apply for online for jobs. And when should I schedule follow-ups? So in the past, I have used kind of a 2-week rule. So if you haven't heard from the recruiter or a follow-up, if you're asking for a networking conversation, if you haven't heard in 2 weeks, follow up. I've been pondering this, and this could be a good discussion as well. I would anticipate possibly during this time shortening that. So much is changing day to day that I think a follow-up in a week might be more appropriate during this time. Again, it's very situational, so it depends on if you're following up on a job application or a networking contact. But during this time when A week feels like a month sometimes. Following up a week later might be appropriate. So some extra tips. What I mean by know where things are is if I asked you where, if I was sending you an email and I asked you to send me back your most current resume, would you be able to know exactly where it is in your documents? Or would you need to search for it? Do you even have an updated resume? So I would just suggest be prepared, be ready for instant requests for your information. And sometimes that means just simply knowing where they are on your computer. I already mentioned this, but it's great advice to continue keeping track of contact info and follow-up dates, especially if you are connecting and emailing with a bunch of people. Again, it's really hard to track connections just using your inbox. So making a list of people you're connecting with and their contact information allows just more ease to follow up and keep track of those conversations. So I would definitely recommend creating and sticking to a schedule. So if you, it depends on if you're in an active job search, if you're just networking, if you're just kind of maybe doing the first preparation steps for a potential job search. It depends on your situation on how many hours to dedicate to your schedule. But one thing is I was thinking about is we're right now living in really unscheduled times. Some people have a lot of home responsibilities. They have kids running around. They're trying to work. They're trying to do school. There's just a lot of things happening. And so when you're working on something so personal and emotional like a job search, I think it would be very helpful for people to set a schedule for themselves so they can have the right set of mind. They can kind of get away from everything else going on and focus on themselves. So for example, maybe you set a schedule like I'm going to be working on my job search Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And this is a good time for me to say too, you can take the weekends off of job searching. You do not have to do this 7 days a week. So this is also kind of permission to create a schedule that works for you and to hopefully balance it with all of the other responsibilities that you have going on right now. So the last one is get people on board. So right now, if you're in a job search or thinking about it or having conversations about potentially changing your job, I would recommend getting people on board, getting people on, just know what's going on with you at the moment. Your closest network should know exactly what you're looking for, so they can advocate for you on your behalf and let you know when they see something relevant. So this is hard for a lot of people. It's hard to be that open. It's very vulnerable sometimes for people to be that open. The only thing I'll say to that is it's more comfortable for some than others, but it does pay off. I'm going to keep encouraging people to ask others for help. And again, that's hard. That's hard for some people, I realize. Okay. So you're organized, you have your materials in hand, you've practiced your story, and you're ready to go. Now it's time to activate. So here's some fair game tips. And these are just a few, but there's some that I have liked. I've recognized and I've liked people that I've seen. And then I have some advice for showing caution about as well, but some fair game strategies to start. So you can start to post your specific story on LinkedIn. The strategy has boomed over the last month for sure. You've probably read some of these and hopefully you've seen some good examples and also some bad examples. Overall, it's perfectly okay to state your situation, what happened, and what you're looking for now. If you're going to make an ask, one thing, I would say be specific. Ask for specific help. So are you looking for people to talk to, networking help, interview help? Being general in your LinkedIn post doesn't really allow people reading to help effectively. So ask for what you need. I've seen more resumes uploaded on LinkedIn profiles, and in a typical market, I tended to not advise to do this. since you might be presenting one version of your resume, but then looking for other jobs and networking about something else, and it can cause a little confusion to kind of be all over the board. However, when time is of the essence and recruiters are trying to be as efficient as possible, you could consider posting your resume on LinkedIn. Depends on the roles you're looking for, but it seems to be a good adaptation to kind of navigate through this market. One thing I'll say to that is only post resumes that are thoroughly reviewed, proofed, grammar checked, spell checked. Make sure it is the best resume you've ever written about yourself before you post it on LinkedIn. Something you can start doing right now is scheduling informational interviews. These are conversations with people in your industry of interest or companies you're targeting. You can get their perspective on the hiring landscape, gain insight into the role or position, and make a new connection that might help you out down the line. One thing too that I want to make sure that I address is the third bullet there is help out others. I mentioned in my intro that it's been kind of really heartening through this time just to see how many people are willing to help each other out. And so I think if we all kind of approach this as we're all in this together, don't forget to also offer help for other people as well as you're navigating this time for yourself. So networking, so skipping down to the show caution, networking and job search don'ts haven't really changed through this crisis. So I wanted to mention two specifically because I feel like they might be quote unquote traps that people might fall into during this tough time. So I would still show caution not to blatantly ask for a job. And I know that might be kind of counter to my advice earlier about asking for very specific help. I think there's a way and a decorum and communication style that you can portray yourself as presenting, again, your story, including your unique skills, your accomplishments, while stating the situation you're in. If you were part of a layoff, if you're part of a temporary furlough and you're looking for 3-month project work, I think you can be that specific. I would just be wary and cautious about the words and how you word that in your post. So you're not just blatantly asking your network for a job. I would ask for opportunities. I would ask for conversations. I would ask them to advocate or let you know when they find, if they have any connections that they can introduce you to. So I guess my caution would just be soften up the ask and not blatantly asking for a job. The second one on there is a common, not even in this job market, but we hear all the time. I've sent in 100 applications this week. I sent in 200 applications over the last month. Be careful you're not over applying. By focusing in on applications that hit your targets that you determined in your strategize section, you can then fully concentrate and prepare to submit the best application you can. We've all gone through job applications before, and there is a sort of fatigue that happens once you start submitting more and more applications. And we probably have all sensed the fatigue come in, and then we get kind of lazy when we are putting in our information, when we're getting a resume set. Maybe you're running out of time and you just want to get the application in, so you just throw up the last resume you put together, but maybe you didn't really read it and align it to the role. So think about that as you're approaching your job search. If you sense the fatigue come in once you're applying, I would just stop. I would stick to your schedule, give yourself a break, and maybe do it in a couple days. So I was thinking of some very COVID specific considerations for job seekers that would be helpful as you begin to activate. So I have recognized over this last month that people should not be scared to reach out for direct conversations. I've had numerous chats with those willing to help that say they're even more flexible and available for phone calls since they are working remotely. Obviously, this is not 100% of people who are willing to help, but I think people in this environment are getting adjusted and opening up their calendars to help others. And they might just have a more flexible schedule because they're working from home, that they can fit in a half-hour phone call more easily than before. You really have to be ready and flexible. So opportunities might come and go really quickly in this environment. So there are positions, and we've recognized this even working with our students as well, that there might be an available position one week, and then that same week they cut the budget and the approval didn't get through and they had to stop the recruiting process. So I think this is just an absolute, this is going to happen. I don't know how long of a horizon this will happen for, but as a job seeker, you just have to be really flexible. Give the recruiter benefit of the doubt. They're doing the best that they can as well. And just keep going to the next one. Okay, so the economy was heading towards this more anyway, but even more, you can be open-minded to limited term, part-time, or project work as we get through this tough stretch. I've worked with people who have actually put these types of things on their strategy to target. So what can I do for 4 to 6 months while we head through the summer, for example? I've also worked with some people who have been temporarily furloughed, so they know potentially they have a job to go back to, but what are they going to do the next 3 months that they're potentially furloughed? So definitely be open to potential projects, part-time work, limited term contract work as well. So finally, obviously, we all know this is happening, right? Interviews are happening virtually. Again, this was a trend that was happening anyways, but it's been kind of put into overdrive. What this means for you as a candidate is you may not have as large of an insider's view into a company before having to make some decisions. It is really hard, especially making this big career choice to go to a new company. It's really hard to go through the whole process virtually. And so no longer is there an office visit for a final round or a chance to meet your team in person. So your evaluation about any given role might have to change as you decide whether to move forward or not. I will say rules don't have to change if you're evaluating an offer. I would still encourage you to request conversations with the team, really whoever you need to chat with prior to making a decision. Although they will be virtual chats in the short term, that doesn't mean your rights as a candidate to get a full view of a company goes away. So still advocate for the same level of transparency so you can fully evaluate every opportunity. So on the right-hand side, I put together some just general recruiting changes that have been talked about during this time. So obviously there's more candidates in the pool as people are furloughed and laid off. There's also people, I think, just willing to take a second look about a career change at this time. So there's more candidates. So meaning you have to be even better at articulating your story and assets to an organization. That becomes really, really essential. Fewer candidates are open to relocating. So recruiters might be advertising their positions less nationally. So that just means that if you are open to relocating, just know you might search national job boards, LinkedIn. You might have to just look harder to find those opportunities where you would need to relocate. Also, this means that you should be really clear that you are open to relocating or that you are planning on moving anyway into that location, which is usually found in a cover letter or those pre-conversations that you sometimes have with recruiters. So make sure they know that you will move when needed after remote working is able to be lifted. And I mentioned this already, but recruiting processes will start and stop multiple times. So for this, I would just be a little more willing to be quote unquote dragged along. And there's this constant tension between job seekers and recruiters that career services tends to be in the middle of, where, well, you haven't heard from the candidate for a while. Well, we haven't heard from the recruiter for a while. And it kind of goes back and forth. The best advice for this is for a job candidate, I would just be willing to be dragged along and not hear about something, or if they are pausing the process or it's on, quote unquote on hold, I would just be willing to be on hold for that position, keep in contact with the recruiter, follow up, check on the status as the weeks go on. So then you can be at the top of their list when it might start, when the hiring process might start again. And then the last one, I don't know if you've seen this, but I've talked to some recruiters and employers that are just looking for restructuring rather than hiring new talent. And it's giving them kind of a reset button to see internally what gaps they can fill prior to looking externally. So all this means for job seekers is similar to the other things that we've been talking about, is the job market is just smaller right now. As companies look more internal, things are on hold, hiring is still happening, but it's just good for you to know the considerations in place. Okay, so after taking all that into consideration, what can you do right now? So first up, update your resume. Even if you just updated it last year, if you took a look at it last week, I would make sure that you are looking at your resume as often as you can to make sure that you have the most up-to-date document in hand that you can send out when needed. So that's a very easy first thing you can start doing. Second, just make a list. Make a list of 5 people that you are going to reach out to just have a conversation. So this could be, I was talking about your closest network earlier. Maybe just have a conversation with someone that you feel comfortable with having a full, honest conversation about your situation, what you're looking for, what help you might need from people. And 5, I think, is enough to just get started. This doesn't need to be that you need to reach out to hundreds of people in order to make an impact in your search. I'd also determine your timeline. So think about, when do I need to secure something? And hopefully you can see, depending on whether you need a job next week or 3 months from now, your strategy, your organization and preparation can ebb and flow based on your timeline. And the fourth thing is set a schedule. So again, we're living in very unscheduled times. So setting a schedule to do these things can be really helpful to, again, clear your mind, put yourself in the right environment, and give yourself an out when you get fatigued and you need to take a break. So I have just some concluding thoughts before we conclude and open it up to questions. So if you've been laid off, I have been reviewing some resumes of people who have gotten laid off, and there's multiple places you can put this, right? And so the overall question you're trying to answer is, why did you leave your most recent position? And that's a good question to answer, and it's relevant, and it helps the recruiter kind of know the situation you're in. If you've been laid off, in my opinion, a good place for that is a cover letter, an email intro, or during the phone screen. I've seen a few resumes that have it in their profile section or summary section at the top of a resume. I just don't think you need to take up space to put that on there, because there's going to be other conversations that you have to give the reasoning why you're looking for something new or why you're no longer at your most recent position. And an advantage that we're going through all together right now, less explanation tends to be needed. We're all kind of speaking the same language. If you say my position was eliminated due to COVID-19, that's probably good enough for a lot of the recruiting processes. I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of similarities that I've recognized between now and 2008, and this is one of them. I remember working with people back then, and really all people needed to say was, I was laid off because of the economy. We're all kind of in this together. We know what's happening, and that's an advantage for you all to be able to communicate in a way that relates to everybody. So you do not need to spend all day, every day on your job search. For something like this that is very personal, and again, it's very emotional, there's a lot depending on these processes typically. And so therefore burnout risk is much higher than a normal job. So you've probably heard before that searching for a job is a full-time job, and it might feel that way, but it's actually harder because you can burn out so quickly because it's so exhausting, more so than your normal job. So know that that feeling of fatigued, exhaustion is normal. And so put that into your schedule and give yourself a break. You do not need to spend all day doing these things. I would also encourage everybody to lean on others when you need them. And again, have confidence in your skills and your ability, even in these tough job market, to move ahead in your career. And so I wanted to refer everybody, if you do need more support, all of the career teams in the Wisconsin School of Business is opening up our student resources to alumni. And so there's the URL to use to get to all of our online resources. And then there's also a blurb and link to how to gain access to career coaching as well if you need more assistance. As promised, there's my email address. Please reach out anytime if you have a quick question, if you get a weird question from a recruiter and you don't know how to respond. I'm happy to help anybody that needs help during this time. So please connect with me on LinkedIn, use my email, and get in touch. Okay. I think it's time. We have about 13 minutes. That's good for questions. And Shannon, I think, was collecting them along the way.
I was. So I've turned back on my video. So I will say we did get a question early on about will slides be shared after the presentation? Yes, we will share the slides. We'll actually show the recording of the presentation. You should expect that in the next couple of days. So you will have access to see what Gina has put on her slides. As Gina also mentioned, if we can't get to your questions, we've gotten a number of them throughout, so we do have a lot already. She's graciously offered to follow up with you afterward. You can feel free to reach out to her directly, but if you also just want to include your email address as you're submitting questions into the chat box, that will help us make sure that we get back to you. Okay, so Gina, I'm going to go to our first question here. So when most postings are online, is there a way to know who to follow up with if there isn't a name attached to it?
That is a great question, and I get that all the time. Unfortunately, no. Sometimes it's very mysterious, right? And that's probably where the question is coming from. What I'll say is, and it's interesting how advice is changing over this time, but in the past, I would say if you want to follow up and you have no contact information, you can't find someone on LinkedIn for some reason, you don't have an email for HR, there's a couple things I would suggest. I've had clients in the past just email HR at the company email. Sometimes those get through. I've had clients in the past just call the general main line of the company, depending on if it's a small or large company, to try to get a hold of someone to check the status of your application. I keep going back to LinkedIn, but it's such a good resource, right? I would doubt that you can't use, I think you could probably find someone there to at least send a LinkedIn message to check who to contact for updates. But unfortunately, no, 100% of the job postings, if sometimes they don't have anyone to follow up, you usually get a confirmation email from a generic email that it says, do not reply to this email. And that's going to happen. Hopefully, enacting some networking strategies, you already have some people at the company that you've talked to for informational interviews or someone that referred you that you can kind of squeak your way in to find out an update.
So kind of a follow-up question, I think, that relates to that. Can you elaborate on outreach plans and tips on where to start? So should we be cold calling our LinkedIn contacts, asking if they know of any opportunities? I think you talked about this a little bit, but this person says, I don't have much experience with outreach networking activities on top of online job search.
Yes, great question. the first thing I'll say is it gets easier the more you do it. So the more you delay, the harder it will be. So I would start with something simple. So, and I mentioned one strategy is just starting with 5 people you know the best. So you could do an informational interview with one of your current coworkers right now and just start practicing conversations. The best practice, in my opinion, is verbal. So yes, I mean, writing, you review, you need written materials, but we rarely have to be put in a position where we're verbally talking about ourselves. So that practicing that, it could happen with people you know really well that you're really comfortable with, and then kind of slowly expand to people that you don't know. The other piece of that question, I think, was should you cold call? I would cold email, cold message, yes, absolutely, reach out. If the messaging is good, you can connect with anybody and they should understand kind of why you are connecting with them. Where we run into problems with that is when people, let's say, message 50 people the exact same message with no personalization or customization, people can see right through that. And so, but if you are reaching out, you see someone, let's say, is a recruiter at a software company in Minneapolis, and you know it kind of fits your interest, you could absolutely LinkedIn message that recruiter, tell your story, tell your situation, maybe put in some of those unique skills into your message, and potentially see are you looking for anybody right now. Again, that's a message to a recruiter. And so I would say yes to all of the above, and it gets easier the more and more you do those things. On the Alumni Resources website, I think there's a link, and Shane, maybe we can send this out afterwards, but we have example LinkedIn messages for cold messages. And if it's not on that website, I'll find a way to get it out to everybody, or email me for that maybe, and I can help you with the first initial LinkedIn message.
Perfect. So, Gina, this is maybe not exactly your wheelhouse, but someone asks, considering the economy and job market, would this be a good time to go back to school? So in your opinion, I know you're more focused on career, but any thoughts on going back to get your MBA specifically?
That's a great question. Everyone should come to the Wisconsin MBA program. And that's a great question. I think a lot of people in tough job markets do default to education, which is not a bad thing. Education is great, skill building is great. What kind of education, I think, is where conversations can help people, like what's most appropriate. If you're struggling finding a job, should you fully invest in a full-blown 2 to 3 to 5 year graduate program? I don't know. It kind of depends on the exact situation. I absolutely believe in education skill building, though. That could mean a certificate program. It could mean just an online training program. It could mean professional development sessions. It means a lot of different things. And for a big group of people, it does, a bad job market kind of triggers that evaluation, and a lot of people do decide to come to graduate school. So again, I mean, if you're considering that, most graduate programs do have admissions staff that helps you talk through that even pre-application. So, and especially obviously if you're considering an MBA with Wisconsin, get in touch and we can link you with the right people. But I always believe in skill building for sure.
So here's a question from someone who's maybe in a different position. Going back might be not be the right thing to do. Do you have any advice for an older worker who was laid off? I listed the last 20 years of work, which was 2 jobs. I did not list dates before that, but included 3 jobs with the length of time worked in parentheses.
Can you say that one more time, Shannon?
Yeah, so how to list, I think, your experience over the course of 20 years where you've had that in 2 positions.
So that, honestly, that is really individual, I think. If that person, whoever submitted that question, wants to email me, I'm happy to look at your resume and can give some thoughts on it. Happy to do that. In general, when you have a lot of experience, it's still really important to distill it down into the most relevant items that recruiters are going to latch onto. And it's really hard to detach yourself from all of that experience. I mean, you've built it over 20 years. You're probably really proud of it. And so getting an external view on it, like what to cut, sometimes an external view can help with that because you're so personally invested in everything you've done. And I'll say too, with 20 plus years of experience, it really allows you to frame your resume for the specific jobs that you're going for. So the project you worked on 20 years ago might be relevant for the job you're going for. And so then it's just a matter of formatting and visualization and making the resume still really cohesive and direct to the point. And so again, if that person wants to email me, I'm happy to help with that.
Great. So I know you've mentioned recruiters a couple of times. Here's a question. Should we be reaching out to recruiters versus waiting to see if they reach out to us? How do you find a recruiter to work with?
I'm assuming these are contracted recruiters. I'm assuming external. Yeah. Yeah, there's similar to real estate, there's buyers and sellers, recruiters. So what you would be looking for is basically a job seeker recruiter, and there's firms, they're usually regional, and there's various levels of service. So some of these recruiting firms, you just submit a resume on their website and you can be part of like their book of business. Some you can actually personally contract with, and they help search for you. Again, they're usually industry specific and regionally specific. And I don't have like a list of recruiters necessarily to share. I will say, and this is not my expertise area at all, but I just say make sure they're reputable. Usually recruiters are best served when they have referrals from someone. If someone worked with a recruiter and referred you to them, just make sure that they're like legit. And I would maybe just have a lot of the big recruiting firms that actually have recruiters on staff to work with job seekers. A lot of them do like free informational chats just to make sure that they're a fit with the firm. So that's what I'll say. And then one word of wisdom I've heard over the years is like, don't put money up front. So if they're asking for money up front, that's probably not ideal.
All right, I think we have time for one last question. Again, if you didn't get your question answered, we will follow up with you. If you have any last questions, feel free to put those in the chat box with your email. Okay, so from a salary perspective, is it better to wait for the economy to recover or take what you can get at a reduced salary in the current market?
Ooh. So I'm going to translate that question into if you have a salary of something right now and you take something for something lower, is that going to lower your personal value when you then potentially get something else? No. That's not going to affect your leverage or any sort of negotiation in the future, or it shouldn't. And so whether you take a lower salary or not, I don't think it necessarily aligns with future prospects and future potential for salary. It's all kind of how much do you need? Like, how much do you need in this time to get by? And again, that comes back to timeline, your personal needs, supporting your family. There's so many responsibilities that are happening right now with everybody. And so what salary you take is really up to you. But in my opinion, I don't think that is going to affect any future prospect or any sort of leverage you might have to get back up to the salary you had before.
Great. Thanks so much, Gina. I think that this has been really helpful information. So just as a reminder, we will follow up with the recording from today's presentation. I want to thank everyone for joining us. We'll also be sending you a short survey following today's session. We'd really appreciate it if you fill it out. We take all of that into consideration for how we can improve in the future. So we look forward to your feedback. Thank you so much. Be well, and on Wisconsin.
Thank you, everybody.